The moment I opened the email from Ancestry DNA, expecting to find some interesting facts about my Irish heritage, and instead discovered that my eldest son Michael, who I had raised for 45 years, wasn't actually my biological child, but the product of a decade-long affair between my wife Linda and my best friend since high school David, was the moment my entire life revealed itself to be a carefully constructed lie that everyone around me had participated in maintaining. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. My name is Richard Coleman, and I'm 70 years old, standing in my home office in Hartford, Connecticut, staring at a computer screen that just destroyed everything I thought I knew about my family, my marriage, and the man I had called my best friend for over 50 years, who took his secret to the grave 5 years ago, probably laughing at me from hell for raising his son as my own. Let me take you back to how this started, because the DNA test was supposed to be a fun Christmas gift from my younger son Patrick, who thought it would be interesting for the family to explore our ancestry together, never imagining he was about to detonate a nuclear bomb that would obliterate 45 years of marriage and reveal that the two people I trusted most in this world had betrayed me in the cruelest way possible. Linda and I met in 1976 when we were both 25, working at Aetna Insurance, where she was a secretary and I was a junior analyst, and she was beautiful with long blonde hair and blue eyes that seemed to sparkle when she laughed at my terrible jokes, making me feel like the luckiest man alive when she agreed to marry me 2 years later. David was my best man at our wedding, having been my closest friend since we were 15, playing football together at Hartford High School, and remaining inseparable through college, even though he went to Yale and I went to UConn, because our friendship was stronger than any institutional rivalry or social distance. He married his wife Barbara the same year Linda and I got married, and our families became intertwined with joint vacations, barbecues, holiday celebrations, and our children growing up together like cousins, which now takes on a much more sinister meaning, knowing that Michael and David's son James were actually half-brothers, not just family friends. Michael was born in 1979 after what I thought were 2 years of trying to conceive with Linda, and I remembered being overwhelmed with joy when I held him for the first time, seeing what I thought were my features in his face, though looking back now, I can see David's jawline, his nose, his hands, that should have been obvious if I hadn't been blinded by trust and love. The affair apparently started in 1977, just a year after our wedding, when David was having problems with Barbara and would come to our house to talk about it while I was working late trying to establish myself at the company, and Linda would comfort him, which apparently involved a very specific type of comfort that resulted in my eldest son. For 10 years they carried on behind my back, meeting when I was at work or traveling for business, using Barbara's struggles with depression as cover for why David was always at our house, and why Linda was always so concerned about his well-being, never letting me suspect that their concern for each other went far beyond friendship. Patrick was born in 1982, and I remember Linda seeming relieved when he looked exactly like me with my red hair and green eyes, as if she had been worried about having to explain another child that looked nothing like me, though I didn't understand that relief until now, when everything makes horrifying sense in retrospect. Our daughter Sarah came in 1985, and she too looked like me, which Linda would comment on frequently, saying how lucky we were that the kids inherited my features instead of her plain ones, which I now realize was her way of reinforcing the lie about Michael, who looked nothing like me, but I was too trusting to notice. The DNA test was Patrick's idea after he had done one himself and discovered we had a small percentage of Scandinavian ancestry, which he thought was fascinating, and he bought tests for the whole family as early Christmas gifts, so we could compare our results and learn about our family history together. Michael had been reluctant to take the test, saying he didn't trust companies with his genetic information, but Patrick convinced him it would be fun and meaningful to do as a family, and so we all spit in our tubes and sent them off, never imagining what would come back 6 weeks later. The first sign something was wrong was when Michael's results came back showing he and Patrick were half-siblings, not full siblings, which the website explained could happen if they had different fathers. And I laughed, thinking it was a mistake, because how could my sons have different fathers when Linda and I had been married for 45 years? But then I looked closer at the DNA matches and saw that Michael matched with several people with the surname Morrison, which was David's last name, and my blood ran cold as I realized what this might mean, though my mind still refused to accept the obvious explanation staring me in the face. I ran my own comparison and confirmed that Michael shared no DNA with me at all, 0%, not even the tiny amount you might share with a distant relative, which meant that the son I had raised, loved, supported, and paid for college wasn't biologically mine, but belonged to someone else entirely. The someone else became crystal clear when I did more research and found that Michael's DNA matches included David's nephew Tony, who had also done the test, and was listed as a first cousin, which would only be possible if David was Michael's biological father, making everything sickeningly obvious. I sat in my office for 3 hours staring at the screen, running the comparisons over and over, hoping for a different result. But the science was undeniable and unchangeable. Michael was David's son, conceived during an affair with my wife, while I was working 60-hour weeks to provide for what I thought was my family. When I confronted Linda that evening, she initially tried to deny it, claiming the test must be wrong. But when I showed her the Morrison family matches and the specific percentage matches that proved David was the father, she broke down and admitted to the decade-long affair that had produced Michael and destroyed everything I believed about our marriage. She said it started innocently, with David coming over upset about Barbara's mental health issues, and one night when I was traveling for a conference things got physical, and instead of stopping they continued the affair for 10 years, meeting 2 or 3 times a week, while I was at work completely oblivious to the betrayal happening in my own home. The affair apparently ended when Barbara got pregnant with their second child, and David recommitted to his marriage. But by then, Linda was pregnant with Michael, and they decided to pass him off as mine, rather than destroy both families with the truth, which seemed noble to them, but was actually the cruelest possible deception. Linda swore that after the affair ended, she had been completely faithful for the last 35 years, as if that somehow made up for the decade of lies, and the 45 years of deception about Michael's paternity, claiming she had wanted to tell me but couldn't bear to hurt me, which was rich considering the hurt she was causing now. She cried and begged for forgiveness, saying that David had been weak and she had been lonely, and it just happened, which is what cheaters always say, as if affairs are accidents rather than thousands of deliberate choices to betray someone who trusts you completely and would never imagine such deception. The worst part was learning that Barbara had known about the affair and about Michael's paternity, having figured it out when Michael was about 5 and started looking exactly like David. But she had chosen to keep quiet to preserve both marriages and protect the children from the truth. Linda admitted that Barbara had confronted her about it and threatened to tell me, but Linda convinced her that it would destroy everyone's lives, especially the children who were innocent and didn't deserve to have their worlds shattered by their parents' mistakes, though apparently I deserved to live a lie for 45 years. After David died of a heart attack 5 years ago, Barbara had considered telling me the truth, but decided it would be cruel to destroy my image of my best friend and my marriage, when David was no longer alive to face the consequences. And Linda seemed to have been faithful since making it seem like ancient history, not worth destroying lives over. But it wasn't ancient history to me discovering at 70 years old that my entire adult life had been built on a foundation of lies, and that every memory I had of David and Linda was tainted by their betrayal, and everyone's complicity in maintaining the deception, including Barbara, who I had comforted when David died. Michael took the news badly, as you would expect, finding out at 45 that the man who raised you isn't your biological father, and that your mother has been lying your entire life about something so fundamental, while your biological father was someone you called Uncle David, and whose funeral you attended as a family friend. He initially lashed out at me as if I had done something wrong by discovering the truth, saying I should have left it alone and not taken the DNA test, but eventually he realized his anger was misdirected and turned it toward Linda, who had robbed him of the chance to know his biological father while he was alive. Patrick and Sarah were devastated learning their mother was capable of such deception, and that their older brother was actually their half-brother, with Patrick feeling guilty for buying the DNA tests that revealed the truth, while Sarah was furious that Linda had made their entire family live a lie to cover her own selfish choices. The extended family found out quickly, because these things don't stay secret in the age of social media, and Michael's wife Jennifer was horrified to learn that her children's grandfather wasn't who they thought, and that their genetic history was completely different, requiring new medical histories and explanations to teenagers about family deception. David's children, James and Rebecca, were equally shocked, with James refusing to believe it at first, until he saw the DNA evidence, and Rebecca, actually, saying she had always thought Michael looked like their father, but had assumed it was just coincidence, never imagining her father had betrayed his best friend so thoroughly. Barbara, when confronted, finally admitted she had known for 40 years and apologized for keeping the secret, but said she had been trying to protect everyone, which rang hollow considering she had protected Linda and David, while leaving me ignorant, making me the only person not in on the secret of my own life. She revealed that David had felt guilty about it for the rest of his life, and had tried to make it up to me by being a good friend, which was laughable, because good friends don't sleep with your wife for 10 years and father children that you raise unknowingly as your own. Apparently, David had wanted to confess several times over the years, but Barbara had convinced him it would only cause pain and wouldn't change anything, since Michael had already been raised as my son, and the truth would just destroy multiple families for no good reason, except to ease David's guilty conscience. The financial implications were significant because I had paid for Michael's education at Boston College and law school, totaling over $300,000, plus his wedding, the down payment on his house, and numerous other supports over the years that should have been David's responsibility, if anyone had bothered to tell me the truth. Linda tried to argue that I was Michael's father in every way that mattered, and that biology didn't change the fact that I had raised him, but that was easy for her to say when she wasn't the one who had been deceived, and had always known exactly whose child she was raising while I lived in ignorance. I contacted a divorce attorney immediately because staying married to someone capable of such deception was impossible, and discovered that Connecticut's no-fault divorce laws meant that Linda's decades-old affair wouldn't significantly impact the settlement, making her betrayal essentially consequence-free from a legal standpoint. The house we had lived in for 30 years, where the affair had taken place in my own bed, while I was at work, had to be sold because I couldn't stay there with every room containing memories that were now revealed to be lies, and Linda crying about losing her home as if she hadn't destroyed mine first. Michael struggled with whether to take a DNA test to confirm David was his father, even though the ancestry matches made it obvious, but eventually he did. And it confirmed what we already knew, that David Morrison, not Richard Coleman, was his biological father, changing everything about his identity and family history. He asked me if I still considered him my son, and I honestly didn't know how to answer, because while I had loved him for 45 years as my child, learning he was the product of the worst betrayal imaginable made it hard to look at him without seeing David's deception and Linda's lies reflected in his face. The therapy to deal with this has been intensive and expensive, with my therapist saying this type of paternity fraud creates a unique trauma because it destroys not just the present but retroactively poisoning every memory and making you question what was real in your entire life when such a fundamental truth was a lie. Linda tried to minimize it, saying it was just DNA and didn't change our family bonds. But that's easy to say when you're not the one who was tricked into raising another man's child, while that man smiled to your face and pretended to be your friend, attending birthday parties and graduations for his secret son. The fact that David and I had maintained our friendship for all those years, while he knew Michael was his son and watched me raise him, makes the betrayal so much worse, because every interaction was built on a lie, and every moment of friendship was tainted by his secret knowledge and lack of remorse. I think about all the times David gave me parenting advice about Michael, and how he must have been laughing inside knowing he was telling me how to raise his own son, while I thanked him for being such a good friend and godfather to the boy who was actually his biological child. The times Michael and James played together as kids take on new meaning, now knowing they were half-brothers, not just family friends, and I wonder if David ever looked at them together and felt guilty, or if he was just relieved that his secret was safe, while I remained the ignorant fool. Barbara claims David loved me like a brother, and that the guilt ate at him, which is supposed to make me feel better. But it doesn't, because if he truly loved me, he wouldn't have slept with my wife for 10 years, and he would have had the courage to tell me the truth instead of taking it to his grave like a coward. She gave me a letter David had written to me before he died that she was supposed to give me if the truth ever came out, and in it, he apologized and tried to explain how it happened, but I burned it without reading it because nothing he could say would justify the betrayal or make it hurt less. The divorce proceedings have been brutal, with Linda trying to claim that the affair was so long ago it shouldn't matter now. But it matters to me because I just found out about it, and the statute of limitations on betrayal doesn't exist just because the liar managed to keep their secret for 45 years. She wanted to keep the house and half of everything, including my pension, claiming she had been a faithful wife for 35 years, as if that erased the 10 years of affairs and 45 years of lies about Michael. But the judge wasn't sympathetic to her timeline argument and divided things equitably. Michael has been seeing a therapist to deal with the identity crisis of discovering his biological father was someone else, and that his mother had denied him the chance to have a real relationship with David. Though what kind of relationship can you have with someone who won't acknowledge you as his son? He's angry at Linda for the deception, and at David for dying before the truth came out, and at me for taking the DNA test that revealed everything, though he knows that's irrational. But trauma doesn't follow rational patterns when your entire identity has been shattered. Patrick and Sarah have been supportive of me while struggling with their own feelings about their mother, and the revelation that their family was built on such a massive lie. With Sarah, saying she can't trust anything Linda says anymore, and Patrick feeling responsible for exposing the truth. The grandchildren are confused and hurt with Michael's kids, not understanding why their grandfather doesn't want to see them anymore, though I'm trying to work through that in therapy, because they're innocent victims of their grandmother's deception, just as I was an innocent victim of my wife's betrayal. Some family members have said I should forgive Linda because it was so long ago, and we had many good years together, but those good years were built on a lie, and I can't forgive someone who looked me in the eye every day for 45 years knowing she had betrayed me in the worst possible way. Others have said I should have let it go when David died and not taken the DNA test, but I didn't know there was anything to let go of, and finding out the truth even late is better than living a lie forever, though the pain of discovery at 70 feels particularly cruel when I have limited time to rebuild. My relationship with Michael is complicated because I do love him as I have for 45 years, but I also can't look at him without seeing the betrayal and wondering how different my life would have been if Linda had been honest from the beginning, or better, yet faithful to our marriage vows. He wants to maintain our father-son relationship and says DNA doesn't matter, but it does matter because it represents the fundamental dishonesty that created him and the betrayal that everyone participated in while I alone was kept ignorant, raising another man's child as my own. The legal question of whether Michael has any claim to David's estate is complicated since David never acknowledged him as his son and Barbara, as his widow, has no obligation to recognize him, though morally the hundreds of thousands I spent raising David's child should come from his estate, not mine. Barbara has offered to reimburse me for Michael's education costs from David's life insurance, but it feels like blood money and doesn't compensate for the emotional investment I made in raising a child I thought was mine, while David got to be the fun uncle without any of the responsibilities. The social fallout has been extensive, with our entire friend group taking sides, and many people admitting they had suspected something over the years, but hadn't wanted to get involved, which makes me wonder how obvious it was, and how blind I must have been to miss what everyone else apparently saw. Some friends have rallied around Linda, saying she made a mistake decades ago and shouldn't be punished for it now. But it wasn't just a mistake, it was a decade of choices followed by 35 years of lies, and the punishment is simply the natural consequence of her actions being revealed. Others have supported me, saying they can't imagine the betrayal of discovering something like this at 70, and that I have every right to divorce Linda and distance myself from Michael, though some think I'm being too harsh on Michael, who didn't choose the circumstances of his birth. The truth is, I'm angry at everyone involved, including Barbara for keeping the secret and our friends who suspected but said nothing, and even myself for being so trusting and naive that I never questioned why Michael looked nothing like me, but exactly like David. I've started dating again at 70, which feels strange but necessary to prove to myself that I can trust again, though I find myself wanting to DNA test any potential partner's children just to make sure I'm not being fooled again, which my therapist says is a normal response to this type of betrayal. The woman I'm seeing, Margaret, is a widow who understands trust issues and doesn't take it personally when I need constant reassurance that she's being honest with me about everything, because she knows that Linda destroyed my ability to take anything at face value ever again. We joke darkly about doing DNA tests on any future grandchildren, just to make sure they're actually related to who they think they are, because once you've been fooled about something so fundamental, you can never fully trust again that people are who they claim to be. The financial cost of the divorce and therapy has been significant but not as significant as the emotional cost of learning that my best friend and wife betrayed me together, and everyone knew but me, making me the pathetic fool in a tragedy I didn't even know I was starring in. I'm trying to build a relationship with Patrick and Sarah's children, who are definitely my biological grandchildren, while struggling with Michael's kids, who I loved as my grandchildren, but now have to process as David's biological grandchildren, making family gatherings complicated and painful. Michael has started researching David's family history and medical background, which he needs for his own health records and his children's, but it's painful watching him try to connect with a biological father who's been dead for 5 years and never acknowledged him as a son. He found old photos of David and was shocked to see how much he looks like him, especially as David aged, and he's angry that Linda never told him the truth when he had asked as a child why he looked different from me, which she had dismissed as him having her family's features. The revelation has made him question everything about his childhood, wondering if David treated him differently knowing he was his son, and whether certain moments of connection were because of their biological relationship or just coincidence, making every memory suspect and unreliable. Linda has tried to maintain relationships with the children, but Sarah refuses to see her, and Patrick is minimal contact, while Michael is working through his anger in therapy, trying to decide if he can forgive her for stealing his chance to know his biological father and for making him live a lie. She's living in a small apartment now, crying about how one mistake 45 years ago has cost her everything. But it wasn't one mistake, it was thousands of choices to betray me with David, and then 45 years of choosing every single day to maintain the lie rather than tell the truth. The fact that she let me pay for Michael's everything while knowing he was David's son feels like theft on top of adultery. And I've actually consulted lawyers about whether I can sue David's estate for the costs of raising his child, though they say it's legally complicated and probably not worth pursuing. What hurts most is thinking about David at Michael's wedding, giving a toast as the godfather and family friend, while knowing he was actually the biological father, and me, the ignorant fool, thanking him for being such an important part of Michael's life, not knowing he was the most important part, genetically speaking. I wonder if he ever felt guilty watching me teach Michael to drive, or attending his baseball games, or helping with college applications, knowing that these were things he should have been doing as the biological father, but had forfeited through his cowardice and deception. Barbara says David did feel guilty, and that's why he was always so generous with loans I never had to pay back and gifts for the kids. But that just makes it worse because he was essentially paying child support through the back door while still maintaining the lie and letting me believe I was raising my own son. The DNA test has revealed other family secrets too, with several cousins discovering affairs and non-paternity events, making me wonder how common this type of deception is, and how many men are raising children that aren't theirs while believing they're the biological fathers. There's actually a support group for men who have discovered paternity fraud, and the stories are heartbreakingly similar, with wives and best friends being a common combination, and the discovery usually coming through DNA tests that were meant to be fun family activities. Some men in the group have managed to maintain relationships with the children they raised, but most struggle like I do with the conflicting emotions of love for the child and rage at the deception that created them, making every interaction complicated and painful. The group leader says the average is about 3 to 5 years to process this type of betrayal and rebuild some kind of relationship with the non-biological child, though some men never manage it and cut contact completely, which seems harsh but understandable given the depth of the deception. I'm trying to work toward forgiveness not for Linda or David, but for my own peace of mind, but it's hard when every day brings new reminders of the lie I lived, and the fool I was for trusting the two people who betrayed me most thoroughly. The house where Linda and I lived sold last month, and as I walked through it one last time, I thought about all the family dinners with David and Barbara, all the birthday parties and celebrations, all the moments I thought were genuine, but were actually performed on a stage where everyone knew the script except me. I'm living in a smaller place now, trying to build a new life at 70, which isn't how I planned to spend my retirement. But then nothing about my life turned out to be what I planned because it was all based on a lie that everyone conspired to maintain while I played the fool. If you like this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.